You are Eleanor Ashford, a respectable widow in a Kensington townhouse in July 1878, and you've just realized that mourning is less about the heart and more about the stopwatch. Your husband has been lying in state for 4 days, but Dr. Pemberton just posted a scarlet fever notice 3 doors down. This means the medical officer of health will be knocking on your door within 72 hours for a mandatory sanitary inspection. In this city, the law is clear. Keeping remains past 48 hours is a public health hazard, but for high society, burying your husband too quickly is social suicide. Death in Europe has always been a statistical mess, but here, it's a choreographed performance. If the inspector documents your breach before the coffin is sealed, your daughters won't marry well. They'll end up as governesses, or worse. The mystery isn't whether you grieve for your husband, but whether you can maintain the illusion of dignity while your parlor becomes evidence of a health violation. You have 72 hours to turn this inconvenient corpse into a masterpiece of propriety before the sanitary bureaucracy turns your legacy to dust. In Kensington, death costs nothing. It's the reputation that's unaffordable. The scarlet fever notice goes up at 5:30 on Thursday morning, 3 doors down, while you stand at the upstairs window in yesterday's morning dress. Your hand rests against the frame. The wood is cool. Dr. Pemberton hammers the printed card to the Hendersons' door with 4 precise strikes, adjusts his leather satchel, and turns to survey the street, as if calculating distance house by house. He does not look up. You step back anyway. The gaslight in the upstairs hall has burned all night. William has been dead since Monday at dawn. The undertaker quoted 8 days for proper display. Pemberton's manual, the one you read last year when Mrs. Talbot kept her mother's body for 9 days and the medical officer threatened removal, states 48 hours maximum in warm weather. You are now operating in the gap between social necessity and statutory violation, and the man with the authority to resolve that gap has just announced his presence on your street. Downstairs, the parlor smells of camphor and something the camphor no longer covers completely. The ice pans need emptying. You emptied them at midnight. The blocks delivered yesterday morning at 7 have diminished by 1/3 already, and the Iceman does not know why your household order has tripled since Monday. You have not told him. You have told no one except Thomas Webb, the undertaker's assistant, who promised the coffin could remain open through Sunday if the ice held and the weather stayed mild. The weather has not stayed mild. July has turned warm 3 days early. The thermometer in the hall read 71 degrees at midnight. You descend the stairs in darkness, counting steps by memory, 16 to the landing, 14 more to the ground floor. The carpet muffles your footsteps. Morning wear rustles with every movement. 43 yards of black bombazine, according to Agnes, though you are only wearing 38, and she will notice when she arrives this morning to inspect your arrangements. The parlor door stands open. William lies in the casket Thomas Webb, delivered on Monday afternoon, positioned beneath the window where morning light will filter through black crepe and illuminate his face for visitors. 63 mourners so far. Each one remarked on how peaceful he looked. Each one stood for the prescribed interval. Each one departed carrying a mental inventory of this room that they will compare against whatever standard they maintain for proper mourning display at your social tier. You check the ice. The blocks sit in their zinc-lined box beneath the casket stand, wrapped in canvas that has gone damp. Meltwater pools in the collection pan. You lift the pan, 14 pounds, maybe 15, and carry it to the scullery. The water sloshes. You pour it into the sink and return to position the empty pan beneath the drip point. The smell in the parlor has changed since yesterday. Not dramatically. Not enough that a visitor standing at the prescribed distance would notice. But you are not standing at the prescribed distance. You are standing close enough to see that the careful work Thomas Webb did with powder and positioning is beginning to require more camphor, more flowers, more of the lavender sachets Agnes brought on Tuesday. Pemberton will inspect every house on this street within 72 hours. That is what the scarlet fever notice means. That is what the Public Health Act requires when infectious disease is confirmed within a residential block. He will count the occupants. He will examine the drains. He will inquire about recent deaths and current illnesses, and any circumstances that might constitute a sanitary hazard under the statutory definition that gives him authority to remove bodies from private homes to municipal mortuaries, regardless of family preference or mourning custom. Your husband has been dead for 96 hours. The funeral is scheduled for Sunday afternoon. That is 4 more days. Pemberton's manual states 48 hours maximum. You are now operating 60 hours past the limit, with 72 hours remaining until inspection. The arithmetic is simple, the solution is not. You return to the window. The street is empty now. Pemberton has moved on to inspect the Hendersons' household. And you have until he works his way back up this side of the block to decide which rules to break and which to perform with perfect exactness, so that when he arrives with his leather satchel and his statutory forms, you can demonstrate that this household maintained every required standard, except the one you had no choice but to violate. Catherine Ashford will wake soon. She is 14. She asks direct questions. Yesterday she asked why the parlor smelled like the garden shed where the geraniums died last winter. You told her it was the preserving solution Mr. Webb applied. She accepted this. She will not accept it again. The ice melts. The mourners arrive. The medical officer calculates his route. You stand in the space between these facts and build the performance that protects your daughters from the consequences of your husband dying 4 days too early for the mourning schedule. Agnes Grimsby considers minimally acceptable for a man who held a banking position. Dawn breaks pale through the crepe-covered windows. The gaslight flickers. You do not adjust it. Light discipline matters now. Everything matters now. Pemberton will arrive in 72 hours. William has been dead for 96. The gap between these numbers contains your entire future. You smooth your dress and prepare to receive the first visitors. Agnes Grimsby arrives at 9 o'clock. You hear her on the steps before the housemaid announces her. The particular rustle of full mourning wear. The measured pace of someone who has rehearsed the exact depth of grief appropriate for a deceased nephew by marriage. She enters the parlor already cataloguing, her gaze moving from your dress to the window crepe to the casket flowers in systematic inventory. Eleanor. She does not embrace you. She takes your hands briefly, releases them, and steps back to examine your attire, with the focused attention of a customs officer inspecting suspicious cargo. The bombazine is insufficient. You have not yet spoken. She has already delivered her verdict. Agnes arrives at 9 in the morning to inspect your mourning arrangements and pronounces your crepe insufficient for a woman whose husband held a position in banking. The correct yardage, she explains, is 43 yards for a widow of your station. You are wearing 38. She can tell by looking. She moves past you to inspect the casket arrangement. Her mourning dress is perfect. Jet beading at the cuffs. Crepe veil pinned at precisely the angle Queen Victoria established in her own widowhood. Agnes has been preparing for other people's grief her entire life. She wears mourning the way generals wear medals. You follow her to William's casket. She stands at the prescribed distance, 3 feet, close enough to demonstrate appropriate sorrow, far enough to avoid unseemly intimacy with death. The parlor smells of camphor, layered over something Agnes does not acknowledge. Lavender sachets sit in dishes on the side tables. The flowers you refreshed at dawn already droop slightly in the July warmth. The casket placement is correct, Agnes says. The flowers are adequate. The window treatment meets standard. She produces a small notebook from her reticule. I have confirmed the funeral for Sunday afternoon. 4 days hence. That is the minimum acceptable interval for a man of William's position. You calculate while she speaks. Sunday is 4 days. Pemberton inspects within 72 hours. That gives you, at most, until Saturday evening before he reaches this house. The vigil must be maintained continuously, Agnes continues. No gaps in attendance. Mourners received daily between 2 and 5 o'clock. The casket remains open until Saturday evening to allow full community observation. These are not suggestions. She has just extended your timeline by 2 days. She has also made it impossible to accelerate the burial schedule without confirming that you are failing to perform grief correctly. You understand that this visit is an audit, not a condolence call. Catherine asked about the smell yesterday, you say. The preserving solution. Agnes's expression does not change. The smell is mourning. She will adjust, all daughters adjust. She returns her notebook to her reticule. I will call again tomorrow to review the visitor log. You are maintaining the log. It is not a question. Yes. Include names, arrival times, duration of visit, and relationship to the deceased. The record demonstrates proper community acknowledgement. She moves toward the door, then pauses. The additional yardage can be acquired from Marshall and Snellgrove. Tell them I sent you. They will understand the urgency. She departs the way she arrived. Measured steps, appropriate sorrow, perfect execution of the performance she has studied for 63 years. You return to the casket after the door closes. William Ashford's face shows the careful work Thomas Webb completed on Monday. Powder, positioning, the particular arrangement of hands and collar that creates the appearance of peaceful sleep rather than biological shutdown. Webb promised the presentation would hold through Sunday if the ice held and the temperature stayed moderate. The temperature has not stayed moderate. The ice pans need emptying again. You completed this task 3 hours ago. You check the visitor log Agnes referenced. 63 mourners since Monday. Each entry records the details she specified. Name, time, duration, relationship. Mrs. Blackwood from 2 doors down stayed 17 minutes on Tuesday. Reverend Hartwell came Wednesday morning and prayed for 12 minutes by the clock on the mantel. Your own daughters rotate through every evening after supper, performing the vigil duty Agnes outlined in her first visit. Catherine sits longest. She brought her needlework last night and worked on her sampler in silence for 40 minutes. She did not ask about the smell again. She breathed through her mouth. You empty the ice pans. The meltwater has increased since dawn. 17 pounds this time. Nearly 3 pounds more than the midnight collection. The blocks in the zinc-lined box have diminished to perhaps 60% of their original volume. The Iceman delivers at 7 each morning. £40 per delivery, charged at standard household rates. He has not asked why your consumption has tripled. You have not volunteered the information. Thomas Webb arrives at 10:30. You hear him at the service entrance. Undertakers do not use front doors during vigils. The housemaid shows him to the parlor. He carries his leather case and the particular expression of professional sympathy that reveals nothing. Mrs. Ashford. He sets down his case. The arrangements proceed appropriately. This is undertaker language for the body has not yet failed in observable ways. Miss Grimsby visited this morning, you say. She confirmed Sunday afternoon for the service. Webb's expression shifts microscopically. Sunday afternoon. That is, the extended timeline we discussed. 4 more days. Yes. He opens his case and removes a small bottle of preserving solution. The phrase everyone uses, though you understand it, is primarily camphor and alcohol and hope. I will refresh the application. The presentation remains appropriate. He works quickly. You stand at the parlor door and watch him tend to William's body with the efficient movements of someone who performs this task multiple times weekly. The smell intensifies briefly during the application, then subsides beneath the new layer of chemical intervention. The ice supply is adequate, you say. The ice supply is adequate if the temperature remains steady. Webb closes his case. I have scheduled the final preparations for Saturday evening. The casket will be sealed then. Sunday morning we will transport to the church. Saturday evening, that is 3 days hence. That is, you calculate, 70 hours from now. Pemberton will inspect this street within 72 hours of posting the Henderson notice. Saturday evening might be exactly concurrent with his arrival at your door. The medical officer has posted a scarlet fever notice 3 doors down, you say. Webb's hands stop moving. This morning, at 5:30. He absorbs this information with the practiced calm of someone whose livelihood depends on navigating the intersection of grief, custom, and sanitary law. Dr. Pemberton will inspect all households on this street within the statutory period. 72 hours. Yes, he picks up his case. The situation is not ideal. This is undertaker language for, you are now operating in direct violation of the medical officer's manual, and if Pemberton arrives before burial, he has statutory authority to remove William's body to the Fever Hospital mortuary, regardless of Agnes Grimsby's mourning timeline. I will return Friday afternoon, Webb says. We will assess the schedule then. He departs through the service entrance. You return to the parlor window and stand where you stood at dawn, looking at the street where Pemberton posted his notice. The Hendersons' door still displays the scarlet card. Other households have begun their own preparations. Windows open for extended periods. Servants scrubbing steps. The particular activity that signals official scrutiny has arrived in the neighborhood. Your household shows only morning stillness. Black wreaths. Drawn curtains. The prescribed performance of grief that must continue for 4 more days while the ice melts, and the medical officer calculates his route house by house along this street. Catherine appears in the doorway. Mother, Mrs. Blackwood is here for a condolence call. You smooth your insufficient morning dress, and prepare to receive the neighbor whose 17-minute visit on Tuesday will become evidence in whatever account she provides to her own social circle about the Ashford household's grief performance during July 1878. Mrs. Blackwood will observe everything. She will report everything. And when Pemberton arrives with his statutory forms, she will be interviewed about conditions in this house during the days preceding inspection. You descend to receive her with perfect composure. The cellar stairs descend from the scullery through darkness that gaslight does not reach. You count 14 steps, one hand on the railing, the other lifting your skirt clear of the stone. The air temperature drops with each step, 71 degrees at ground level, perhaps 60 at the cellar floor. Not cold enough, not anymore. Agnes departed at 10 o'clock. Mrs. Blackwood stayed 12 minutes, observed the casket from the prescribed distance, remarked on the peaceful presentation, and departed carrying whatever inventory she will file in her mental catalogue of neighborhood events requiring subsequent discussion. Thomas Webb completed his application of preserving solution, and left instructions to notify him if the presentation changes before his scheduled Friday return. The presentation is already changing. You came to the cellar because the truth lives here. Away from morning performance, and Agnes's yardage audits, and Mrs. Blackwood's 12-minute surveillance. The ice storage occupies the northeast corner where the walls stay coolest year-round. £40 delivered this morning at 7. The Iceman's cart arrived on schedule. The delivery boy carried the blocks down these same stairs wrapped in canvas, positioned them in the zinc-lined box according to instructions you provided Monday. He has made this delivery 4 consecutive days now. He has not asked why a household of moderate size suddenly requires £40 daily. Perhaps he assumes summer heat. Perhaps he does not assume anything. You lift the canvas covering. The blocks have diminished by 1/3 since dawn. Perhaps £27 remaining of the original 40. Meltwater pools in the collection pan beneath the storage box. You crouch beside it. The pan holds £19. You lifted £14 at dawn. £5 of melt in 5 hours. The arithmetic proceeds regardless of Agnes's morning timeline or Pemberton's inspection schedule. At current temperature, 40 pounds of ice lasts approximately 12 hours before requiring replacement. The Iceman delivers once daily. The casket requires ice beneath and around the zinc-lined box to maintain preservation temperature. You are burning through supply faster than delivery replenishes it. You carry the collection pan to the scullery drain and pour carefully. 19 pounds of water that was, hours ago, solid structure holding temperature steady beneath your husband's body. The biological reality proceeds on its own schedule. Camphor and careful positioning delay observable consequences but do not stop the process Thomas Webb avoids naming directly during his professional visits. The cellar clock, brass mechanism mounted beside the wine storage, shows 1:30. The next ice delivery arrives in 17 hours. The blocks currently in storage will last perhaps 8 more hours at this rate of melt. That leaves 9 hours overnight with insufficient cooling capacity, unless you reduce household consumption elsewhere, or convince the Iceman to add an evening delivery to his route. You climb the stairs and find Catherine in the kitchen, helping cook prepare the cold supper appropriate for a household in mourning. She looks up when you enter. "The ice is melting quickly," she says. She is 14. She notices everything. "Julie heat," you say. "Mother, I emptied the pan in the parlor this morning before Agnes arrived. It was heavier than Monday's collection." You set the empty pan beside the scullery sink. Catherine watches you with the particular attention she inherits from her father. The same focused observation that made William successful in banking. The same precision that now makes his eldest daughter dangerous during a week when small observations can destroy carefully maintained performances. "The parlor requires more ice in warm weather," you say, "to keep the flowers fresh." Catherine returns to cutting bread. "The flowers are drooping anyway." She has given you an exit from this conversation. You take it. "I will speak to the florist about refreshing them tomorrow." Agnes scheduled the vigil to continue through Saturday evening. That is 4 more days of maintaining William's presentation for community observation. 4 more days of ice deliveries and meltwater collection and camphor applications. 4 more days before Thomas Webb seals the casket and removes the burden of preservation from your household. 4 more days. Pemberton arrives in, you calculate, 60 hours now. Saturday evening at the earliest, possibly sooner, if his street inspection proceeds faster than the statutory minimum. Agnes's morning timeline and the medical officer's arrival window are converging on the same 12-hour period, and you have no authority to control either schedule. You return to the cellar after Catherine goes upstairs. The blocks have diminished further in the 30 minutes since your first inspection. Perhaps 24 pounds remaining now. Definitely less than 25. The melt rate is accelerating as the blocks reduce in volume. Smaller mass, more surface area exposed to ambient temperature, faster transition from solid to liquid state. The collection pan already holds 3 more pounds of water. You stand in the cellar darkness and perform calculations Agnes Grimsby does not include in her morning protocols. 40 pounds of ice delivered daily at 7 in the morning. Current consumption rate, 5 pounds per 5 hours, approximately 1 pound per hour, 24 pounds per day. Deficit, 16 pounds daily between delivery and consumption. That deficit accumulates from the ice already in storage, which means each day the starting volume decreases, which means each day the blocks last fewer hours, which means eventually, possibly by Friday, certainly by Saturday, the ice will fail completely during the overnight period when no delivery occurs, and the household operates on whatever supply remained from the morning delivery. When the ice fails, the temperature rises. When the temperature rises, the preserving solution becomes insufficient. When the preservation fails, the presentation Thomas Webb maintained with professional skill becomes something else. Something 63 mourners have not yet observed, but will certainly notice if it occurs before Sunday's burial. Something Dr. Pemberton will document in his leather ledger as evidence of sanitary violation requiring immediate intervention. You climb the stairs. The house is quiet now. That particular morning silence Agnes prescribed as appropriate for the vigil period. No music, no raised voices. No activities suggesting that normal life continues during the prescribed interval of grief display. The quiet makes every sound distinct, the stairs creaking beneath your weight, your mourning dress rustling with each step, the drip of meltwater into collection pans you will empty again before the household sleeps. The parlor stands empty of visitors until the afternoon receiving period begins at 2 o'clock. William's casket occupies the space beneath the window, where morning light filtered through black crepe and created the exact illumination Thomas Webb recommended for optimal presentation. The flowers have drooped further since dawn despite your attempt to refresh them. The lavender sachets Agnes brought Tuesday no longer completely mask the smell that Catherine noticed yesterday and did not mention again today. You check the small pan positioned beneath the casket stand. 8 pounds. You removed this pan at dawn, empty. 8 pounds of melt in 7 hours from the ice positioned directly beneath William's body, the blocks wrapped in canvas and zinc, that keep the cooling effect concentrated where preservation matters most. The calculation is clear, the solution is not. You could notify Thomas Webb that the ice supply is failing and request earlier sealing. That would contradict Agnes's timeline and confirm you are unable to maintain proper morning display for the minimum acceptable interval. You could approach the Iceman about additional deliveries. That would require explaining why your household suddenly needs twice daily service, which means admitting the purpose driving the increased consumption. You could reduce ice use elsewhere in the household, the kitchen, the larder, the minimal cooling that makes July heat bearable for a house in morning wear. That would buy perhaps 6 additional pounds daily, enough to delay failure but not prevent it. Or you could maintain the current trajectory and hope that Sunday's burial arrives before either the ice fails completely or Pemberton's inspection reaches your door. The afternoon receiving period begins in 23 minutes. You refresh the flowers with stems cut shorter to disguise their droop. You position the lavender sachets where their scent will reach visitors before the smell beneath it does. You smooth your 38 yards of insufficient bombazine, and prepare to receive whoever arrives during the 2 to 5 window Agnes established as socially necessary. The doorbell sounds at 2 o'clock precisely. Reverend Hartwell, returning for his second condolence call of the week. He will pray, he will observe. He will remain exactly the correct duration for a clergyman's morning visit. And when he departs, he will carry his own inventory of this household's grief performance, to add to whatever accounts circulate through the parish, about how Eleanor Ashford maintained her vigil during the July week, when William stopped breathing, and Dr. Pemberton posted scarlet fever notices 3 doors down. You receive him with perfect composure. The ice melts, the hours pass. The gap between what Agnes requires and what Pemberton will accept narrows with each delivery that fails to replenish what the July heat consumes. Somewhere in that narrowing gap is the decision that determines whether your younger sisters inherit the household reputation intact or watch it dissolve along with everything else your husband's professional legacy was supposed to protect. You have not yet made it. You are Catherine Ashford, a widow in West Kensington in February 1891, and Dr. Marcus Pemberton, medical officer of health, carrier of inspection forms and legal authority to remove bodies from private homes, arrives in 72 hours. Not because mourning customs have changed. Because the Public Health Act doesn't recognize grief as exemption from sanitary law. Here's what 72 hours actually costs when you're keeping your husband's body at home. The price of ostrich plumes, measured against your daughter's futures. This is what happens when Victorian mourning protocol meets municipal enforcement deadlines. Thomas Webb spreads the catalogue across the morning room table at 1 o'clock. The illustrated pages display 3 grades of ostrich plume in ascending order of cost and social significance: standard, superior, and premier, each rendered in precise engravings that show the curve and density of feather appropriate to each price point. The superior grade, he says, touching one illustration with a clean fingertip, is what most families of standing select. You notice he does not say most families in mourning, only families of standing. The distinction matters. Agnes sent word this morning. The superior grade is minimally acceptable for a professional man of William's position. 17 shillings per plume. The hearse requires 8. You perform the arithmetic while Webb watches your face for the hesitation that will mark you as insufficiently devoted or insufficiently funded. £6 16 shillings. In feathers. The superior grade will be appropriate, you say. Webb makes a notation in his ledger. His pen does not pause. An excellent choice, Mrs. Ashford. The visual presentation at the service will reflect the family's respect for the deceased. The catalogue itemizes grief into purchasable components. Coffin lining in 3 qualities of satin, 8 shillings, 12 shillings, 17 shillings per yard. Nameplate engraving charged by the letter. Mutes available at 2 shillings each for the procession. Each component carries its own social weight, its own signal to observers about whether you have honored William adequately or failed him through economy. You are assembling your husband's funeral like ordering furniture from a commercial inventory. The undertaker's catalogue lists 3 grades of ostrich plume. Agnes recommends the superior grade. The superior grade costs 17 shillings per plume, and the hearse requires 8. You do the arithmetic while she watches, waiting for you to confirm that you value your husband at £6 16 shillings in feathers. Webb turns the page to mourning stationery, black bordered cards, 3 weights of paper stock. For acknowledgements following the service. Most families order 200, though 300 provides adequate margin. 200 cards at 4p each, another £3 6 shillings. 200, you say. His pen moves again, no commentary. But you see him glance toward the parlor door, toward the room where William lies, as though calculating how many people will need acknowledging based on the traffic he has already observed through your household. Outside, a constable's whistle cuts the afternoon quiet. 3 sharp notes, the signal for a street disturbance. 2 houses down, perhaps 3. Close enough that Pemberton will note it in his inspection log. Close enough that any household irregularity becomes evidence of neighborhood decline. The burial garments, Webb continues. We provide a complete service, preparation, dressing, final arrangement. The standard package includes... I have already dressed him, you say. Webb's pen stops. For the first time since he arrived, his professional composure falters. Just slightly. Just long enough for you to see that you have violated protocol in a way that surprises even an undertaker's assistant. That is most unusual, Mrs. Ashford. It is done. He recovers. Of course. Then we will proceed directly to the viewing arrangements and transport logistics. The catalogue shows 3 grades of hearse: standard, superior, premier. The superior hearse includes glass viewing panels, black plumes for the horses, velvet draping for the coffin platform. It costs £9. You approved the superior plumes without revealing that £6 16 shillings in feathers represents a month of your reduced household budget. Because Webb will repeat any economizing to Agnes. Because Agnes will interpret thrift as inadequate mourning. Because inadequate mourning damages your daughter's prospects in ways that compound across years. The arithmetic is immediate. £6 16 for plumes. £9 for the hearse. £3.6 for cards. £18 for the coffin itself, already selected and delivered. Another £12 for the burial plot fee, the gravedigger's wages, the church donation. £49, 2 shillings. For 7 days of mourning custom. William's professional income was £200 per year. Your widow's portion is £90. The funeral will consume more than half of your first quarter's survival margin. You approve each item without hesitation. Your face shows only appropriate solemnity. Webb completes his notations. The service is confirmed for Monday then, 8 days from the death, as is proper. The hearse will arrive at 10 o'clock. The procession will proceed to St. Mary's for the service, then to Brompton Cemetery for interment. 8 days. Agnes's minimum. Pemberton's inspection is due in 67 hours. That will be satisfactory, you say. Webb closes his catalogue and rises. I will return Sunday evening to seal the coffin. It is customary for family to be present, though not required. He does not explain what seal the coffin means in practical terms. You do not ask. When he departs, you remain at the morning room table. The catalogue is gone. The numbers remain, written in your mental ledger, where they will stay until Monday, when you pay the bill from the household fund that was meant to cover 3 months of food, coal, and wages. Upstairs you hear Catherine moving between rooms, the careful footsteps of a 14-year-old who has learned not to disturb mourning. Your younger sisters are with her, Margaret and Elizabeth, their names unspoken in the house since William's death, as though silence itself were a form of mourning dress. You rise. The parlour door stands open. William remains where he has been for 4 days, increasingly dependent on the ice you measure twice daily, increasingly subject to the biological processes that Thomas Webb's professional vocabulary works so carefully to obscure. 67 hours until Pemberton. 4 days until burial. The gap between these two numbers is where your daughter's futures rest. Calling hours begin at 3. You position yourself beside the casket in the configuration Agnes prescribed during her morning visit. Standing, not seated, 18 inches from the coffin side, facing the parlour entrance at a 3/4 angle that allows mourners to approach, without requiring you to turn your back to William's body. The first caller arrives at 3 minutes past the hour, Mrs. Hartwell, the vicar's wife. She enters with the measured pace appropriate to a house in mourning, her gloves already removed, her condolence prepared. Mrs. Ashford, I am so very sorry for your loss. Thank you for coming. She approaches the casket. Views William for the prescribed interval, not so brief as to suggest indifference, not so long as to suggest morbid fascination. 30 seconds. She bows her head. Returns to you. He looks peaceful. Yes. This is the response expected. You deliver it without elaboration. Mrs. Hartwell departs after 4 minutes. The proper duration for a formal condolence call from someone not intimately connected to the deceased. Each visitor follows the established pattern: entrance, condolence, viewing, departure. You track the duration of each call against the proper interval, while maintaining the facial expression that demonstrates appropriate sorrow without theatrical excess. Mrs. Pemberton, no relation to Dr. Pemberton, arrives at 3:15. She brings her daughter, a girl of 16, who will not look directly at the casket, but keeps her eyes fixed on the floral arrangements. They stay 6 minutes. Within acceptable range. Mr. Dorset from William's firm arrives at 3:30. He speaks briefly about William's professional contributions, his steady work, his reliability. You accept this testimony without comment. He views the body, departs after 5 minutes. The parlour temperature rises with each additional body, the air thickens with perfume and mourning fabric, and the camphor smell you have stopped noticing except when visitors arrive, and you see them register it in the moment before their faces arrange into sympathy. You count 17 callers by 4 o'clock. each one performing the same ritual, each one carrying away observations about your flower arrangements, your dress yardage, your composure, the details that will be repeated in other parlors and assessed against the standard you are performing in real time. At 4:15, Agnes arrives. Not as a mourner, she was here this morning, but as inspector. She moves through the parlor with her systematic attention, checking the positioning of the mourning cards, the freshness of the wreaths, the alignment of the candles. She stops beside you, does not look at you directly, speaks in the low tone appropriate to a house of death. Mrs. Pemberton remarked on the flowers. You wait. She found them appropriate. This is Agnes's version of approval. You accept it with a slight incline of your head. Agnes continues her inspection. She pauses at the casket, studies William's face for longer than any other visitor has done. You see her notice what you've been watching for 4 days. The subtle changes that camphor and cool air slow but cannot stop. The slight sunkenness around the eyes. The waxy quality to the skin. She says nothing, but she moves to the window and adjusts the drape to reduce the light falling across the coffin. The undertaker returns Sunday to seal, she says. Yes. You will be present. It is not a question. You confirm it anyway, yes. Agnes departs after 11 minutes. Not a condolence call, a supervisory visit. You mark the distinction. Through the window you see a municipal cart pass. The water inspector's wagon, brass fittings catching afternoon light. Pemberton's office shares the same building. The same administrative authority. The same mandate to document compliance with sanitary regulations that make no allowance for morning schedules. At 4:30 you hear footsteps on the front stairs that do not match the measured pace of morning. Quicker, more deliberate. You turn toward the entrance as Mrs. Blackwood enters. She wears full mourning, more elaborate than strictly necessary for a neighbor with no family connection. Her veil is longer than yours. Her gloves extend past the elbow. Dear Mrs. Ashford, she says, and her voice carries further than necessary in the confined space. What a terrible loss. You perform the expected response. She approaches the casket, but instead of viewing William and withdrawing, she stops. Examines the flower arrangements, counts the wreaths, notes the quality of the coffin lining visible where the lid stands open. She remains at the casket for 2 minutes. Then she moves to the mourning cards displayed on the mantel, reads each one. You watch her build her inventory. The pocket watch in your morning dress marks 31 minutes when she shows no sign of preparing to leave. 31 minutes is the absolute maximum for a condolence call. She is examining your curtain arrangement now, the precise amount of crepe you use to drape the window frames. At 43 minutes she turns to you. You have managed everything so properly, Mrs. Ashford. Your attention to detail is remarkable. Thank you. The plumes, those will be the superior grade, I assume? You understand what she is asking. Whether you are economizing. Whether your mourning is adequate to William's position. The superior grade, you confirm. She nods, satisfied, having confirmed the detail she came to verify. At 51 minutes she finally departs. You watch her descend the front steps with the careful pace of someone who has completed a thorough documentation and will describe this visit in exact detail to audiences who will judge your performance based on her account. The parlor is empty now. Calling hours continue until 5, but no other visitors arrive. You remain standing beside the casket in the position Agnes prescribed, watching the gaslight filter through black crepe, counting the hours until Pemberton's inspection and the days until burial, knowing that every visitor who walked through this room carried away a fragment of testimony that will determine whether your daughters, Catherine and her younger sisters, inherit respectability or ruin. Mrs. Blackwood arrives at 4:30, and you track her visit against the pocket watch you keep in your morning dress. The watch face shows 4:32 when she completes her initial condolence and turns to view William's body. 31 minutes is the absolute maximum for a condolence call from someone not intimately connected to the deceased. Agnes was clear about this in her morning instructions. Mrs. Blackwood spends 3 minutes at the casket, longer than any previous visitor. She does not simply bow her head in appropriate grief, she examines. You watch her gaze move across William's face, his hands folded across his chest, the satin lining visible where the coffin lid remains open for viewing. When she turns from the casket, she does not move toward the parlor entrance, she moves to the mantel. Studies the mourning cards arranged there. 17 cards from 17 separate households, each one proof of your social network, each one a fragment of testimony about William's standing and the household reputation you are defending. She reads them, all of them, takes her time. Your watch shows 4:38. Such a lovely tribute, she says, though she does not look at you. Mr. Dorset's card is particularly gracious. You make the required response. He was kind to come. Mrs. Blackwood moves to the flower arrangements. 3 wreaths on stands, positioned according to Agnes's prescribed configuration. She leans close to the largest wreath, white lilies and fern, from William's firm, and examines the blooms as though checking for freshness. 4:41. She circles the room with systematic attention, pauses at the window to study the crepe draping, touches nothing but her gaze catalogues every detail. Flower count, crepe yardage, casket quality, the gaslight fixtures you've draped in black muslin, the photographs you've turned face down on the side table, as custom requires. You've managed everything properly, she says. The attention to arrangement is remarkable. You recognize what she means. Not compliment, assessment. She is documenting your performance for later circulation. 4:46. She moves to the photographs. Does not touch them but bends to examine which images you've chosen to conceal. Family portraits. William in professional dress. Catherine and her sisters from 2 summers ago. Such beautiful children, Mrs. Blackwood says. Catherine must be 14 now. Yes. A difficult age to lose one's father, she straightens. You'll be managing their prospects carefully, I'm certain. The statement carries weight. She is confirming what you both understand, that your daughter's marriageability depends on how this household emerges from mourning. Whether your performance satisfies the observers, whether any scandal attaches itself to William's death, or your conduct afterward. 4:53. Mrs. Blackwood returns to the casket. This is her third approach. She stands there for 90 seconds this time, and you see her doing what you have been doing for 4 days, watching for the signs that camphor and careful temperature management can slow but not eliminate. The waxy translucence, the subtle settling of features. When she turns back to you, her expression has shifted, still sympathetic, but sharpened by what she noticed. The vigil must be exhausting, she says. One manages. Of course. Though I understand Dr. Pemberton is inspecting the street this week. Something about the scarlet fever, noticed 3 doors down. Your face shows nothing. But she has delivered what she came to verify. That you are aware of Pemberton's schedule. That you understand the risk of keeping William at home beyond the medical officer's tolerance for private mourning custom. His leather case contains forms that override sentiment. His authority extends to removing bodies when public health statutes demand it. I had heard, you say. I'm certain everything is in order. Mrs. Blackwood adjusts her gloves. You've been so careful about every detail. 4:58. She makes no move toward the door. Instead, she returns to the mourning cards. Reads them again, as though memorizing names. Mrs. Blackwood arrives during calling hours, and stays 43 minutes, which is 12 minutes past proper condolence duration. She spends the extra time examining your parlor arrangements for details she can repeat elsewhere. You watch her catalogue the flower count. She is building inventory. 5:01. Finally, she moves toward the parlor entrance. But she stops there, turns back. The plumes for Monday, she says. Will those be the superior grade? You have already answered this question. She is confirming that your answer remains consistent, that you will not economize between now and the funeral in ways that would dishonor William's professional legacy. The superior grade, you repeat. Quite right, she nods. William's position requires it. 5:03. She departs. You hear her footsteps on the front stairs. Slower now, measured, the pace of someone who has completed a thorough inspection and carries detailed testimony. You remain standing beside the casket in the position Agnes prescribed. The parlor is empty. Calling hours continue until 5:30, but no other visitors arrive in the 27 minutes that remain. Your watch shows 5:21 when you finally allow yourself to sit. Not in the chair. Agnes would consider that inappropriate during official calling hours, but on the window seat, partially concealed by the crepe draping. From here you can see the casket, the wreaths, the mourning cards Mrs. Blackwood read twice. The entire arrangement you have built and maintained for 96 hours, while the temperature rises and the ice melts, and the biological reality proceeds underneath the camphor and the careful performance. Outside, the street is quiet except for the lamplighter making his evening rounds. His pole touches each gas fixture in sequence, methodical, predictable. The same rhythm Pemberton will follow when he arrives with his inspection forms, documenting compliance household by household, room by room. 64 hours until Pemberton. 3 days until burial. The gap has narrowed by 3 hours since Thomas Webb spread his catalogue across the morning room table, and you calculated the cost of grief in plumes and satin and engraved brass letters. You watch the gaslight filter through black crepe and wait for 5:30, when calling hours end and you can finally check the ice. The last visitor leaves at 6 o'clock. You close the parlor door. The room is 8 degrees warmer than this morning. The camphor smell no longer masks what it was applied to mask. You lift the casket drape. The ice pans beneath are full of meltwater, the blocks reduced to fragments. The next delivery is not scheduled until 7 tomorrow morning. 13 hours. The lavender sachets you refreshed this morning are already losing potency against the biological process that proceeds regardless of your flower arrangements. You calculate hours remaining against temperature increase. The numbers do not improve with repetition. You open the window 6 inches, enough to lower the room temperature without appearing to air out a corpse. The evening air moves through, cool but not cold enough. You stand in the draft making decisions about which protocols to abandon before the situation becomes visible to the next round of mourners. The casket wood is warmer to the touch than it was at noon. You check the meltwater level again. The pans will overflow before morning if you do not empty them, which means descending to the scullery, with evidence of what is happening upstairs, where the housemaid might observe, where Catherine might ask questions you cannot answer with partial truths. The camphor bottle on the side table is half empty. You applied it 3 times today. It is no longer sufficient. Outside, a cab passes on the street, not stopping at your address. You track the sound until it fades 3 houses down. Every vehicle could be Pemberton arriving early with his leather case and inspection forms, though he is not due for 66 hours. The medical officer of health does not keep predictable schedules when scarlet fever notices are posted. You saw the red placard 3 doors down yesterday morning. He will come to inspect the entire street, and your parlor arrangements will receive the same scrutiny as every other household's sanitary compliance. You stand beside the casket in the cooling room and calculate what can be managed in darkness after the household sleeps. Empty the pans. Refresh the ice with what remains in the cellar. Reapply camphor to the drapes, the floor, the casket edges. Adjust the window to balance concealment against preservation. William's professional legacy depends on this performance. The reputation he built over 22 years of practice rests now on your ability to maintain appearances while temperature rises and biology proceeds on its own schedule. His colleagues will remember how his widow managed the mourning period. Catherine and Margaret and your younger sisters will inherit whatever judgment you earn these 8 days. The undertaker quoted 8 days for proper display. You are on day 4. The margin between these numbers is where decisions get made about what protocol actually means when temperature rises, and time does not stop for grief. You smooth your mourning dress, check the window angle, touch the casket wood one more time to confirm what you already know. Tonight, after everyone sleeps, you will return to manage what cannot be managed in daylight. The room settles into evening. The gaslight flickers. The temperature holds. Barely. You leave the parlor and close the door behind you with the same composed expression you have worn for 96 hours, knowing that composure is a performance that ends the moment you are alone. Catherine finds you in the upstairs sitting room at 8 o'clock. You are working on the morning stationery list. 63 names requiring individual acknowledgement cards written in your hand. She stands in the doorway holding her own stationery. The black-bordered paper Agnes provided with instructions on proper condolence response format. Why does the parlor smell like medicine and flowers at the same time? You set down your pen, look at her directly. It is respectful to keep the room fresh for visitors. This is true in the way that all partial answers are true. She processes this information against what she has observed during the 4 days her father's body has been displayed downstairs. You watch her assembling the reality you have been managing around her. What would the smell be if you were not being respectful? You tell her to finish her morning stationery. She leaves. You sit with the question she did not ask directly. How long will father be in the parlor? The answer you cannot give her depends on variables she should not know exist. Pemberton's inspection schedule, ice delivery reliability, the rate at which bodies decay in July. You return to the acknowledgement cards. Mrs. Whitmore, who brought roses on day 2. Mr. Patterson, who stayed 7 minutes and left without viewing the body. The Harrisons, who sent their housemaid with a note instead of calling personally. Catherine's question stays in the room after she has gone. The question itself is dangerous. If she asks it in front of tomorrow's visitors, you will have no prepared answer that protects both truth and household reputation. You write 3 more cards. The ink dries slowly in the evening warmth. Your hand moves across the paper in the prescribed format Agnes reviewed this morning. Formal gratitude for presence during our time of sorrow. Through the open window comes the sound of footsteps on the pavement below, measured pace, not hurried. You do not look down, but you listen until the steps continue past your door. Pemberton walks that same measured pace when he conducts street inspections. You have seen him 3 times in the neighborhood over the years, always carrying his leather case, always stopping at households where sanitary compliance was questionable. He does not make social calls, he makes legal assessments, and he is due within 60 hours. The gaslight flickers. You adjust the wick. Downstairs, the parlor door remains closed. The window you opened at 6 o'clock lets evening air move through the room where your husband lies, in conditions that require management, not mourning. Catherine is 9 years old. She knows what flowers smell like. She knows what medicine smells like. She is asking about the 3rd smell, the one you have been containing with camphor and lavender and ice, that melts faster than the delivery schedule accounts for. You finish the 4th card. Set it aside to dry. The black border frames your formal script. Catherine Ashford, who asked the question you have been avoiding since the undertaker first explained the timeline 8 days allows versus what biology permits. 60 hours until Pemberton arrives. 4 more days until the undertaker's quoted timeline allows burial. The gap between these numbers is where your daughter's question lives, unanswered but not forgotten. You descend to the parlor at 11 o'clock. The household is asleep. The gaslight turned low, the room cold from the window you left open. The smell present but contained. Your hand touches the casket wood, cool but not cold. The ice beneath is depleted but functional. You calculate hours until the morning delivery against the rate of change you are monitoring in darkness. The floor creaks under your weight. You freeze. Listen for any sound from upstairs. Catherine or Margaret waking to find you alone with their father's body at midnight, performing maintenance they should never observe. Nothing. You adjust the casket drape, refresh the lavender sachets from the supply you keep in the side table drawer, check the meltwater pans. 3/4 full, they will overflow before dawn if you do not empty them now. You carry the first pan to the scullery through darkness. Pour the water into the sink. Return for the second pan. The motion is practiced now. Efficient. You have done this twice before in the nights when sleep was not an option, and management was. The ice fragments remaining in the cellar will last until the morning delivery, barely. You carry 2 blocks upstairs. Place them in the empty pans beneath the casket. The cold radiates through the parlor floor. Outside, a dog barks 3 streets away. Then, silence again. You track every night sound now, cataloging what is ordinary neighborhood activity versus what might be a medical officer arriving unannounced to inspect sanitary compliance. Pemberton has that authority. The 1875 Public Health Act allows inspection at any hour when public health hazard is suspected. The scarlet fever noticed 3 doors down gives him jurisdiction over your entire street. You stand in the cooling room and verify what can be verified. Temperature lowered, smell contained, evidence of process concealed behind protocol and flower arrangements. The casket wood grain shows in the low gaslight. William chose this oak himself 15 years ago, before Catherine was born, when he was establishing his practice and making the decisions men make about their own funerals while their wives stand silent. He did not choose it for July heat. He chose it for appearance at a viewing he imagined would occur in winter, with snow outside and cold air making preservation simple. 59 hours until Pemberton arrives. The window stays open 6 inches. The gaslight stays low. The mourning drapes filter what light remains into the exact performance of grief that protects your daughter's marriage prospects, while you manage decomposition logistics in the middle of the night. You check the casket temperature one more time. Touch the wood, confirm what your hand already knows. A cab passes on the street outside. You do not move until the sound fades completely. Every vehicle at night could be the inspection you are not ready to pass. This inspection will repeat every night until the funeral, or until Pemberton forces the timeline to collapse. Whichever arrives first. You retreat upstairs. The hallway is dark, silent. The household sleeps while you carry knowledge they should not share. Your room, your bed. Your dress still on because undressing requires energy you do not have for tasks that are not preservation. You lie down in full morning costume and close your eyes knowing you will wake in 3 hours to check the parlor again, because vigilance is not optional when reputation depends on concealing what everyone knows is happening but no one is permitted to name. 7 o'clock passes without cartwheels on the cobbles. You stand at the servants' entrance where you can hear the street without being seen from it, listening for the particular rhythm of iron rims on stone that announces the ice depot's morning route. 8 o'clock. Nothing. The parlor held 42 pounds yesterday morning. You calculated 24 hours, supply at current melt rate. That calculation assumed delivery at 7. You send the housemaid to the depot with a note. She returns 40 minutes later with a reply written on the back of your own paper. Delivery delayed due to increased demand. Afternoon service resumed when supply permits. They do not specify what is causing middle-class households to suddenly require industrial quantities of ice in July. The parlor temperature climbs with the morning sun despite the closed drapes and sealed windows. You check the casket at 9:30. The lavender sachets are working harder now. The camphor underneath them marks time in a way that floral scent cannot disguise. You refresh both. Open the window for 6 minutes to cycle the air. Close it again before anyone walking past might notice. 16 mourners scheduled for afternoon calling hours. Every one of them will notice temperature, will notice smell, will notice any change in the carefully maintained environment you have been presenting as natural grief display rather than engineered corpse containment. Dr. Pemberton posted the scarlet fever notice 3 doors down on Tuesday morning. The medical officer of health for West Kensington makes his rounds every 72 hours after initial posting. You have watched the pattern in this neighborhood for 6 years. Tuesday posting means Friday inspection. Friday is day 7. The funeral is scheduled for day 8. The sequence has to hold exactly. The ice delivery arrives 6 hours late, and the Iceman apologizes by explaining that demand has increased since the warm weather began. He does not mention death specifically, no one ever does. They say warm weather as though temperature alone explains why middle-class parlors suddenly require 40 pounds of ice per day. You direct him to the scullery entrance. Pay him without comment. He loads the blocks onto your cart, with the steady efficiency of someone who has made this exact delivery to 30 houses this morning, and will make it to 30 more this afternoon. Every household keeping the same secret behind the same black crepe curtains. The blocks weigh 40 pounds each. You ordered 2. They will last 72 hours if the weather holds. 60 if it warms. The funeral is scheduled for day 8. Dr. Pemberton's inspection window closes at day 7. You see Catherine Ashford through the scullery window, walking past with her daughter, on the opposite pavement. She does not look toward your house, but her stride changes fractionally as she passes the frontage. A half-step acceleration that signals awareness without acknowledgement. Her younger sisters will have told her by now. 3 households on this street keeping vigil. The Ashford family calculates social risk the same way you do. The Iceman wipes his hands on his apron and tips his cap. Same time Saturday, ma'am, if the supply chain permits. Saturday is day 9. You will not need ice on day 9. You nod and close the scullery door, and hear his cartwheels fade toward the next delivery. The mathematics still work. Barely. 40 minutes until calling hours begin. You work through the emergency protocol you have developed over 4 days of crisis management, each action timed against the pocket watch you keep in your morning dress. The new ice blocks slide beneath the casket with a sound you muffle using folded cambric taken from the linen press. Cloth absorbs impact. Converts collision into muted pressure. The blocks settle into position without the crack of ice on wood that would carry through walls to neighboring houses. Meltwater sloshes in the collection pans. You empty them into the bucket kept for this purpose. Carry it to the scullery. Pour it down the drain where no one will see it, and ask why the parlor produces 2 gallons of water daily in a house where nothing is supposed to be melting. Your fingers arrange fresh lavender sachets around the casket perimeter. Replace the wilted flowers in the standing vases with blooms delivered this morning. Adjust the crepe draping where it has settled overnight into shapes that suggest weight rather than decoration. Each action performed with the speed of someone who has timed this routine against the clock, and knows exactly how long each component requires. The room cools by 3 degrees in 20 minutes. You measure this by standing at different positions and registering the air against your face. Temperature change moves like water, pooling in low places first, rising slowly to fill the upper registers of the space. You open the window at 2:25 to accelerate the process. The street air enters with the sound of distant traffic and the smell of summer dust. A medical carriage passes moving west toward the quarantine houses. The horse's gait is unhurried. Pemberton does not rush his inspections. He works street by street, house by house, documenting conditions in the leather case he carries. The 1875 Public Health Act requires written findings. Permits no verbal arrangements. You count 240 seconds. Close the window again at precisely 2:49, so that visitors arriving at 3 will find the parlor in the sealed, fragrant, temperature-controlled state that signals proper mourning rather than corpse maintenance. The casket lid gleams where you polished it this morning before dawn. William's professional reputation rests beneath that lid, along with his body. 23 years of practice. A client list that includes 2 members of Parliament and a county magistrate. The kind of legacy that transfers to daughters as marriageability if the widow manages the mourning period without scandal. You adjust the silver frame containing his medical school certificate. The glass reflects lamplight at the angle that suggests afternoon sun, rather than artificial illumination at 3 o'clock behind sealed curtains. Check the casket position, the drape alignment, the flower arrangements, the guest book open to a fresh page, the calling cards arranged in their silver tray. Everything in its assigned place, performing its assigned function. 3 days left. 72 hours to maintain the performance without any official observer noting discrepancies between the presented timeline and the physical evidence. The clock strikes 3. Agnes returns during calling hours and observes your mourning jewelry with the focused attention she applies to all visible grief components. Her gaze fixes on the jet brooch at your collar for 3 seconds longer than necessary. "Your jet is beautiful," she says in a voice calibrated to sound helpful rather than critical, "though I believe it is not Whitby jet." You hear the correction as the social audit it represents. She continues before you can respond. "Whitby jet is the only geologically appropriate material for a widow of your husband's professional standing. The color holds differently. The weight is distinct. These matters are documented in Cassell's. The Whitby jet brooch in her catalogue costs £8 sterling. 3 months of your remaining household budget after funeral expenses. She knows this because she helped you calculate the funeral expenses. But the knowledge is irrelevant to the standard she is enforcing. Grief has a price schedule and you are underpaying. Agnes observes that your mourning jewelry is jet but not Whitby jet, which is the only appropriate material for a widow of your husband's professional standing. You do not tell her that Whitby jet costs 3 months of your remaining household budget. You nod and accept the correction as though you had simply forgotten which geological formation your grief should come from. "I will make the adjustment," you say. She nods, satisfied that the breach has been identified and will be remedied. She does not ask when. The timeline is understood. First full year of mourning. Visible correction applied before the period expires, and neighbors begin comparing your continued display against the published standards. You calculate silently while she turns her attention to the flower arrangements. Whether visible economizing on jewelry will damage your daughters, prospects less than the debt required to meet Agnes's material standards for widowhood. The mathematics of respectability measured in geological origins and catalogue prices. Your eldest daughter will enter the marriage market in 18 months. The household reputation you maintain now becomes her dowry then. More valuable than any sum you could provide in cash. More fragile than any investment William left in trust. Every caller who enters this parlor is performing an assessment that will be cited in drawing rooms when her name is mentioned alongside a potential suitor. The other callers arrive. You receive them with perfect composure. The jet brooch at your collar suddenly feels lighter than it did this morning, as though Agnes's observation removed some portion of its substance. Mrs. Thornbridge from number 47 brings her condolence card in person, rather than sending it by messenger. She lingers near the casket longer than the others, her attention moving across the arrangements with the evaluative precision of someone cataloguing details for later discussion. She does not touch anything, does not need to. Her presence is the inspection. The parlor holds its temperature, the lavender holds its strength, the performance continues. Pemberton's office is 12 streets east. His leather case holds inspection forms printed with checkboxes for sanitary violations, space for written observations, signature lines for witnesses. 23 years of enforcement means he has seen every variation of household resistance to the Public Health Act. He cannot be convinced that morning custom outranks statute. His career depends on documented compliance. 60 hours until his deadline. 56 until the scheduled funeral. 4 hours of margin, where everything either concludes properly or collapses into documentation that follows your daughters into every marriage negotiation they will ever attempt. You stand beside the casket and smile at the callers, and make the small adjustments to your planned budget that incorporate WhitbyJet into the total, somewhere between the crepe yardage and the undertaker's final invoice. 4 o'clock brings Dr. Marcus Pemberton to the Caldwell residence 2 houses down. You watch from the parlor window through black crepe that filters afternoon light into something appropriately somber, while still allowing clear observation of official movement along the street. The medical officer carries his leather satchel in his left hand and inspection ledger under his right arm. 51 years old, 23 years enforcing the 1875 Public Health Act, walking with the measured pace of someone who documents everything and forgets nothing. He climbs the Caldwell steps without hesitation. The door opens before he knocks. He enters at 4 minutes past the hour. You note the time in the small leather diary Agnes provided for recording condolence calls. The entry reads, Dr. Pemberton, Caldwell Residence, 4:04 p.m. The diary's stated purpose is tracking social obligations. Its actual function is timeline management. 37 minutes pass. You remain at the window, adjusting flower arrangements that require no adjustment, straightening curtain edges that hang perfectly straight. The parlor behind you holds William's casket, 96 hours of vigil maintenance, and ice blocks that are melting faster than Thursday's delivery schedule accounts for. At 4:41 Pemberton emerges. He stops on the Caldwell steps and makes notes in his ledger. His expression reveals nothing about what he documented inside, or whether the Caldwells' household management met statutory requirements. He closes the ledger, descends the steps, and continues up the street toward the Henderson residence, where the scarlet fever notice remains posted. You calculate the timeline. 2 houses between the Caldwells and your door. If Pemberton maintains his current inspection pattern, 1 or 2 houses per day, working systematically through every dwelling on a street where infectious disease has been posted, he will reach your threshold within 48 hours. Thursday afternoon at the earliest, Friday morning more likely. The funeral is scheduled for Monday. 3 days from now, William will have been dead 8 days by then. The medical officer's manual, which Agnes quoted with disturbing precision during yesterday's lining audit, specifies 48 hours maximum for homekeeping in warm weather. You are currently at 96 hours and climbing. Agnes enters the parlor without knocking. She has taken to treating your home as an extension of her authority over proper mourning protocol. Dr. Pemberton is conducting systematic inspections, she says. I observed. The Public Health Act grants him considerable authority. Agnes moves to the window, positioning herself where she can see both the street and the casket. Any household keeping unburied remains past statutory limits faces immediate removal of the body to the Fever Hospital mortuary. You already know this. The question is whether Agnes is reminding you of medical authority or threatening to report your timeline management if you fail to meet her other requirements. The funeral is Monday, you say. That would be 8 days. Agnes does not phrase it as criticism. She doesn't need to. The number itself carries judgment. The undertaker specified. Thomas Webb specified timeline options based on social custom. Agnes turns from the window. Dr. Pemberton specifies timeline limits based on sanitary law. The two authorities are not always compatible. The afternoon light through black crepe catches the scarlet fever notice visible on the Henderson door, 3 houses down, posted at dawn on day 4 of your vigil. Pemberton arrived within 72 hours exactly as the posting requirements mandate. I will manage the schedule, you say. Agnes examines the casket flowers with the focused attention she applies to everything that might be documented. Managing the schedule requires knowing which schedule takes precedence. Medical inspection authority supersedes morning custom when the medical officer determines conditions require statutory intervention. She departs at 5 o'clock, leaving behind the clear implication that your careful performance will collapse into public health emergency if you miscalculate the remaining timeline. You return to the window. The street shows no additional official movement. Pemberton has disappeared into the Henderson residence. The arithmetic is clear. Thursday or Friday arrival, Monday burial, and the gap between those numbers is where household reputation collapses or survives. The pocket watch in your morning dress shows 5:17, 43 hours until Thursday afternoon. Your daughters are upstairs, protected from callers and questions. Catherine Ashford's younger sisters will hear everything Agnes chooses to report. The ice is melting on schedule. The camphor smell persists despite yesterday's emergency refresh. And somewhere between this moment and Dr. Pemberton's arrival at your door, you must decide which protocols to abandon before the medical officer documents their breach in permanent record. Thomas Webb returns at 6 o'clock to finalize coffin specifications. He brings fabric samples in 3 qualities of satin, each arranged on individual presentation cards with pricing notation written in copperplate script at the bottom. The interior lining, Webb says, laying the cards on the parlor table in ascending order of quality. Standard, superior, and finest grade. You examine the samples. The standard quality is acceptable cream-colored satin. The superior quality shows slightly tighter weave and deeper luster. The finest grade appears identical to superior except for the price notation, which is £2 higher. What is the functional difference, you ask? Webb's expression shifts to the careful patience reserved for clients who have missed something fundamental. The lining establishes the standards by which the family honors the deceased. Will it be visible once the coffin is closed for burial? No, madam. You wait for further explanation. Webb arranges the sample cards with precise spacing between each grade, as though the physical presentation will clarify what words have not. Then why does the quality matter? Thomas Webb explains that the coffin lining is available in 3 qualities of satin. The superior quality, he notes, will not be visible once the coffin is closed. You ask why it matters then. He looks at you as though you have suggested attending the funeral in calico. The lining, he explains, is not for viewing, it is for knowing. The finest grade costs £7 10 shillings total. Standard grade costs £3.12. The difference would cover next month's ice delivery and the butcher's bill, with sufficient remainder for household coal through winter. Agnes Grimsby will inquire about specifications, Webb says. There it is, the actual function underneath the euphemism. Agnes will ask. Agnes will document. Agnes will circulate your choice to the households whose opinions determine whether your daughters receive calling cards or social exile. The superior quality, you say. Webb makes a note in his specification ledger. £5 8 shillings for satin no one will see because everyone will know you purchased it. The accounting is simple. You are buying Agnes's approval at wholesale rates, and the invoice will carry notation establishing your devotion through fabric grade buried in clay. The coffin plate requires similar consideration. Webb continues, producing 3 additional samples: brass, silver-plated brass, and sterling, each engraved with William's name and dates in script that ranges from serviceable to elaborate. The functional purpose is identification. The social purpose is public display of expenditure on a component that will be sealed in darkness for eternity. Silver-plated, you say, choosing the middle option before Webb can explain why the sterling grade matters despite being invisible inside a sealed coffin inside a burial vault inside 6 feet of earth. Webb records the specifications with visible approval. You have demonstrated appropriate devotion through documented material choices. The total cost now stands at £13.17 for a funeral that preserves middle-class respectability through components selected not for visibility but for knowing. The interment remains scheduled for Monday, Webb says, closing his ledger, pending any adjustments required by household circumstances. Household circumstances. That's undertaker vocabulary for medical inspection authority, and whether Dr. Pemberton orders immediate body removal before Monday's carefully scheduled burial can occur. No adjustments anticipated, you say. Webb departs at 6:30, leaving behind signed specifications and the clear understanding that he will report your material choices to Agnes, who will evaluate them against published standards for appropriate widowhood, and circulate her assessment to the families whose daughters compete with yours for the same limited pool of acceptable marriage prospects. You return to the window. The street is quiet. Pemberton has finished at the Hendersons. Thursday afternoon arrives in 40 hours. And you have just spent £5.08 on satin. That matters only because Agnes will ask about it and everyone will know your answer. 10 o'clock finds you descending to the cellar with a candle, and the growing certainty that the situation has changed in ways that cannot be managed through social performance. The cellar stairs lead down from the scullery through darkness that gaslight doesn't reach. Your free hand traces the wall for balance. The temperature drops with each step until you reach the stone floor, where the ice delivery sits in wooden boxes lined with sawdust. The meltwater pans show normal accumulation. The ice blocks have reduced to approximately 18 pounds remaining. Thursday delivery is 36 hours away. The calculation still holds if nothing else changes. Then you see the droppings. Small dark pellets near the meltwater pan, fresh enough to glisten slightly in candlelight. You crouch beside the evidence and count 7 distinct droppings in a scatter pattern that suggests multiple visits by something drawn to this location by what you are keeping in the parlor above. The wooden casket support shows gnaw marks, fresh wood shavings on the stone floor. Something has been testing whether the structure can be breached. Not successfully yet. The supports remain sound, but the attempts are recent and persistent. You set the candle down and examine the full perimeter. More droppings near the cellar stairs. Gnaw marks on the doorframe leading to the scullery. Signs that whatever came for the ice stayed to investigate other components of your preservation system. The biological timeline is overriding your social schedule. William has been dead 96 hours. The camphor and ice have slowed the process but not stopped it. And now something with better instincts than human propriety has detected what Agnes's mourning protocols cannot disguise. If Dr. Pemberton inspects and finds rodent evidence near a 6-day-old corpse, he will order immediate removal under public health authority. The documentation will be permanent. The household will be marked as unsanitary in official records that survive longer than middle-class reputation. William Ashford's professional legacy, 22 years establishing the household standing, reduced to a single notation in the medical officer's ledger. You retrieve the scrub brush from the scullery and return to the cellar with a bucket of cold water. The next hour passes in silence, punctuated only by bristles against stone and the drip of rinse water into the floor drain. Every dropping removed, every shaving swept. The gnaw marks remain visible on close inspection, but could plausibly be attributed to general cellar deterioration rather than recent intrusion. You scrub the area around the casket supports until the stone shows lighter than surrounding floor, Then dirty it slightly with controlled amounts of coal dust to restore uniform appearance. At 11:30 you climb back to the scullery and empty the bucket into the yard drain. The parlor above shows no visible signs of intrusion. The casket sits undisturbed. The flowers Agnes arranged yesterday still maintain their prescribed formation around the viewing area. But the situation has changed. The body is attracting pests, which means the timeline you calculated based on ice delivery and medical officer inspection patterns now includes a third variable that operates on biological schedule rather than social custom. Thursday delivery arrives in 34 hours. Pemberton reaches your door within 48. And somewhere between those numbers is the point where evidence becomes impossible to conceal, and your performance collapses into documented sanitary emergency. You return to the parlor and sit in the chair beside the casket, where you have maintained vigil for 4 days. The gaslight through black crepe filters evening shadows into prescribed patterns. Your daughters sleep upstairs. Agnes will arrive tomorrow to audit your continued compliance with morning requirements. And in the cellar, wood shavings on clean stonemark, where something came to test whether your preservation system can be breached before the funeral schedule permits burial. The pocket watch shows 11:47. You calculate hours against delivery schedules, against inspection timelines, against the biological process that continues despite your careful management. The numbers no longer offer simple answers, but they remain absolute. Reverend Hartwell arrives at 10 o'clock, with the funeral service draft folded in his coat pocket, and the delicate expression of a man who has come to deliver unwelcome pastoral guidance. Agnes accompanies him, uninvited, but inevitable. You receive them in the morning room, rather than the parlor, where William remains on display behind closed doors, and 12 pounds of emergency ice that will not last past midday. The Reverend accepts tea. Agnes declines, which signals she has come for correction rather than comfort. Mrs. Ashford, the Reverend begins, setting his cup down with care. I have prepared the service according to your specifications. However, I feel obliged to mention that current circumstances, the summer temperature, the public health concerns on this street, make a shorter interval between death and interment medically advisable. Agnes sets her reticule on the side table with precision. 7 days is the minimum mourning display period for a man of William's professional position. Queen Victoria observed 8 days for Prince Albert before the lying in state concluded. The expectations are documented. The Reverend maintains his pastoral expression. I am aware of the customary period. I am also aware that July temperatures create. He pauses, searching for acceptable phrasing. Challenges to preservation that December does not present. The body has been properly managed, Agnes says. I have personally verified the ice delivery schedule, the floral arrangements, and the temperature maintenance protocols. Mrs. Ashford has received 63 condolence calls. The social obligations have been met according to standard practice. I am not questioning the propriety of the arrangements. The Reverend's tone remains gentle, but his meaning sharpens. I am suggesting that spiritual readiness and pastoral care sometimes require flexibility regarding earthly timelines. You sit in the widow's chair and watch them negotiate your husband's burial as though you have no position on the matter. The Reverend phrases his concern in terms of readiness and care, avoiding direct mention of the biological process proceeding regardless of mourning custom. Agnes counters with social precedent and documented expectations, cataloguing the households who have already paid calls, and will circulate their observations through the 63 networks that determine whether Catherine Ashford and her younger sisters receive invitations or social exile. Neither of them mentions the smell that has become normal atmosphere in your household. Neither acknowledges the ice expense that now exceeds your monthly household budget. Neither names what they both understand, that the timeline they are debating is not about your grief or William's dignity, but about whether decomposition becomes visible before the coffin seals. Reverend Hartwell arrives to discuss the funeral service, and delicately suggests that a shorter interval between death and burial is becoming medically advisable. Agnes interrupts to note that 7 days is the minimum for a man of William's position. The Reverend and Agnes debate propriety versus decomposition in your parlor, while your husband provides the evidence neither of them will name directly. The silence extends. You understand that both of them are waiting for you to state a position that will either satisfy social obligation or acknowledge biological necessity, and that your choice will be repeated across the calling networks by afternoon tea service. The funeral will proceed in 2 days rather than 3, you say. Agnes's mouth tightens. 2 days violates her minimum standard by 24 hours. The Reverend's expression eases slightly. 2 days prevents Dr. Pemberton from arriving before the coffin departs, assuming his inspection schedule maintains its 72-hour pattern. 2 days allows adequate time for final arrangements, you continue, addressing the Reverend. And meets the essential mourning obligations, you add, acknowledging Agnes without conceding her full requirement. Neither of them responds immediately. They are both calculating. Agnes measuring the social cost of the shortened timeline, against the alternative of having no timeline left to shorten. The Reverend weighing pastoral duty against practical necessity. I will adjust the service scheduling, the Reverend says finally. Thursday morning then, 10 o'clock. Agnes lifts her reticule. I will inform the family. And note that circumstances required modification of the standard period. You recognize the threat in her phrasing. She will document the breach, but frame it as forced accommodation rather than willful violation. The distinction matters to the households who will hear her explanation and judge whether the household reputation William's professional legacy built can withstand the deviation. They depart together, leaving you in the morning room with cold tea and the calculation both of them accepted without acknowledging. 48 hours now separates William's current state from his permanent interment, and you have committed to a timeline that leaves zero margin for delay. The parlor door remains closed. The ice beneath the casket continues melting. Thursday morning arrives in 46 hours, and somewhere 3 doors down. Dr. Marcus Pemberton maintains his inspection schedule, leather case in hand, unaware that you have just cut the margin closer than even Agnes finds comfortable. You stand, smooth your morning dress, and return to the vigil position that has defined every waking hour since Monday, the last evening before the funeral arrives, and you sit alone in the parlor as July light fades through crepe-draped windows. 6 days have passed since William stopped breathing. Tomorrow morning, Thomas Webb arrives to seal the coffin permanently, ending the home vigil that has consumed every calculation since the moment you understood that grief is measured in ice bills and yardage, rather than tears. The camphor and lavender smell has become the normal atmosphere. You will associate this scent with the specific exhaustion of performing widow for 63 households, while managing decomposition logistics in a corset that permits neither full breath nor honest posture. The gaslight flickers. You do not rise to adjust it. The room holds accumulated weight, decisions made, protocols bent, breaches concealed. The vigil chair no longer feels like furniture. It has become the position from which you have directed the preservation of your daughters' futures, while watching your husband's body fail, every system designed to maintain its dignity. A cab passes outside. The wheels sound deliberate, official. You listen until the sound fades toward the Pemberton house 3 doors down, then further, then gone. Not him, not tonight. Tomorrow the performance ends, the coffin seals, the funeral proceeds. Dr. Pemberton either arrives after departure, or he does not, but either way the decision point passes, and you will know whether the mathematics held. You sit in cooling air and listen to the house settle. Meltwater drips into pans for the last time. The ice delivery scheduled for dawn will be the final delivery. £40 to ensure stability through 12 hours until burial. After Thursday morning there will be no more calculations, no more ice, no more monitoring the temperature against the clock. Your hands rest in your lap, still gloved, despite the private hour. The gloves have become part of the costume. You have not removed them in 6 days except to sleep, and even then you wake already reaching for them, ready to resume the position before full consciousness returns. The window shows darkness now. Street sounds fade. Somewhere 3 doors down, Dr. Pemberton maintains his scarlet fever inspection schedule, documenting breaches and calculating risk. 48 hours remain on the notice posted to the Havisham door. 48 hours before his authority requires attention to the next household on the street. You do not know if he has observed your extended vigil. You do not know if Mrs. Blackwood has reported the ice deliveries or Catherine's question about the smell. You know only that by tomorrow afternoon the evidence will be sealed in oak wood and brass, beyond inspection, beyond gossip, beyond everything except memory and whatever Mrs. Blackwood chooses to repeat at future tea services. The weight in your shoulders has become permanent. You notice it the way you notice breathing, present but no longer remarkable. Tomorrow it lifts, or it does not. Either way, the vigil ends. You remain in the chair as darkness completes itself. The parlor holds its final night of occupation. The casket rests where it has rested since Monday. William lies within, or what remains of William after 6 days of July heat and failing ice, and preservation measures that were always temporary, always insufficient, always a negotiation with time that you were never going to win completely. Thursday morning comes in 9 hours, then the sealing, then the service, then the interment in ground that does not care about propriety or protocols, or the 63 households whose opinions have governed every choice you made this week. You close your eyes, not sleep, just stillness, the last stillness before the final performance. Mrs. Blackwood returns at 9 o'clock on the final morning, which surprises you until you notice she has brought her sister, Mrs. Pemberton, not the medical officer but his wife, who has not previously paid a condolence call. You understand immediately that this is not morning visit but guided exhibition. They enter the parlor with systematic attention. Mrs. Blackwood moves to the flower arrangements first, gesturing for her sister to observe the lily placement and the ostrich plume grades. Mrs. Pemberton nods, absorbing the details with the focus of someone documenting educational material. The crepe yardage, Mrs. Blackwood says, touching the window draping. 14 yards for the parlor alone, proper standard for a professional household. You maintain the bereaved widow position beside the casket. Your role in this visit is to be observed rather than to participate. Mrs. Pemberton examines the mourning wreath composition, the card arrangement on the side table, the precise fold of the casket draping. Mrs. Ashford has managed the vigil according to customary protocol, Mrs. Blackwood continues. Her tone carries the particular satisfaction of someone whose earlier observations have been validated through repeat inspection. 7 days of lying in state, appropriate flower rotation, correct visiting hours. 6 days you think but do not correct. The distinction no longer matters. Somewhere in the house beyond, the final ice delivery rests in pans beneath the casket, £40 scheduled to last until burial. The calculation is exact now. 10 o'clock service, 11 o'clock departure, noon interment. Dr. Pemberton's inspection authority expires with the Havisham quarantine at midnight tonight, but the coffin seals in 1 hour. Mrs. Pemberton approaches the casket with museum visitor attention. She does not look at William but at the brass fixtures, the wood quality, the interior lining visible through the half-open lid. Her gaze catalogues components rather than acknowledging death. The undertaker work is excellent quality, Mrs. Blackwood notes. Thomas Webb's establishment. They maintain proper standards. They circle the parlor twice. Mrs. Blackwood explains the calling card procedure. the morning jewelry grades, the tea service protocol you observed for 63 documented visits. Mrs. Pemberton listens and examines, occasionally asking questions that Mrs. Blackwood answers with the authority of someone who has appointed herself expert witness to your grief performance. You stand in position and perform widow while they document your husband's funeral components as educational reference material. The irony does not escape you that the same woman who circulated observations about extended vigil and ice delivery now presents your arrangements as demonstration of proper mourning custom. But you understand the shift. Mrs. Blackwood's position in her network depends on her ability to identify and explain correct protocol. Your successful completion of the vigil without visible scandal validates her earlier attention rather than contradicting it. 28 minutes after arrival, they depart. You hear Mrs. Blackwood explaining the ostrich plume grades to her sister as they descend your front steps, their voices fading into morning street sounds. The parlor empties. You remain beside the casket, alone finally, with 30 minutes remaining before Thomas Webb arrives to seal the lid permanently. The exhibition is complete. The witnesses have documented the performance held through the final morning. Whatever Mrs. Pemberton reports to her husband, or does not report, will determine nothing now. The timeline ran. The protocol survived scrutiny. The funeral proceeds at 10 o'clock. You touch the casket edge once, briefly, a gesture no one observes. Then you step back and resume position, waiting for the undertaker, and the sealing, that will end the vigil you have maintained through 6 days, that felt like 6 years, and will collapse into 6 words on the funeral card. William Ashford, beloved husband, at rest. Thomas Webb arrives at 11 o'clock with his assistant carrying the coffin lid balanced between them like a door being removed from its hinges. You watch from the prescribed widow position, 6 feet from the casket, shoulders aligned with the parlor window frame, while they measure the lid against the coffin edges with professional silence. The assistant produces a leather pouch containing 8 iron nails, each one counted out onto the mantelpiece, with the precision of currency being verified. 3 pence each, according to the itemized invoice Webb presented yesterday. 24 pence total to seal what has been displayed for 6 days. Webb positions the lid without ceremony. The hammering begins. Each strike carries through the parlor walls, through the floorboards, through the particular silence that has defined this room since Monday morning when William's body was arranged for morning display. You count 8 nails driven home. The sound marks the end of the home vigil with the finality of mathematics. The coffin is now sealed container rather than open presentation. Evidence concealed. Process contained. The performance requirements that have governed every household decision for nearly a week lifting with each hammer blow. Webb and his assistant lift the sealed coffin at 11:15. You note their pace suggests relief rather than solemnity. Men who have been waiting for permission to leave since they delivered the casket components on Tuesday. They carry William out through the front door with the practiced efficiency of furniture removal. Down the steps, into the hearse waiting at the curb with its 8 ostrich plumes catching July morning light. The parlor empties. The space where the casket stood remains marked by the wooden supports and the 2 ice pans positioned beneath them, still holding meltwater from this morning's final delivery. You stand in the absence feeling it as physical change, temperature shift, air movement pattern, the particular weight of vigil maintenance removed after 6 days of sustained performance. 43 hours since Pemberton posted the scarlet fever notice. The coffin now sealed and removed before inspection could document what 6 days of July heat accomplished, despite your ice calculations and camphor measures. Dr. Marcus Pemberton, Medical Officer of Health for West Kensington, 23 years enforcing sanitary provisions, carries legal authority to remove bodies from private homes when public health hazard is documented. The coffin leaving your house sealed means that authority cannot be exercised here, cannot document what the ice barely preserved. You watch through the window as the hearse departs. Mrs. Blackwood, observing from her front steps 3 houses down, cataloguing departure timing and plume quality for future reference. The funeral procession will assemble at 1 o'clock. 2 hours to remove all evidence of the maintenance work you have performed in this room. The casket supports stand empty. The morning light falls through black crepe onto floorboards that show wear patterns where you have stood maintaining the widow position for 96 hours of calling hours and night vigils. You move to collect the ice pans, feeling Catherine Ashford's daughter's futures secured by wooden lid and 8 iron nails. The household reputation preserved through logistics no mourning manual acknowledges but every middle-class widow must master. The ice pans contain perhaps 4 pounds of meltwater combined. You carry them to the scullery with both hands, moving carefully to prevent spillage on the morning dress you have worn without alteration since Monday. The water disposal takes 3 minutes. Evidence of corpse preservation logistics poured into the drain that carries household waste to the street sewer, leaving only empty tin vessels that will be returned to the ice merchant tomorrow. You return to the parlor. The room feels larger without the casket occupying its center, though the dimensions have not changed. Only the object that dictated every arrangement for 6 days now absent. The flower arrangements remain. Lilies and white roses Agnes selected for their symbolic appropriateness. You begin moving them from their casket-adjacent positions to the window ledges, where they will serve as funeral atmosphere rather than viewing display. The camphor smell persists despite ventilation efforts maintained throughout the vigil. You cross to the windows and open all 3 sashes completely, letting July air move through the space for the first time since William's body was positioned for mourning. The breeze carries the scent outward, replacing it with street sounds and the particular warmth of mid-morning in West Kensington. A delivery cart passes. Someone calls for the rag and bone man 2 streets over. Life continuing in its ordinary patterns while you prepare for ceremony. Your back aches from the wooden chair Agnes positioned for widow receiving. 6 days of maintaining proper mourning posture. Spine straight. Hands folded at waist level. Chin neither lifted nor lowered. You had measured William's professional legacy in patient consultations and medical society standing. Now it reduces to ostrich plumes and the neighbor count at calling hours your performance of appropriate grief, the only currency that preserves what he built. The mantelpiece clock shows 11:45. 75 minutes until the funeral procession assembles. You review the remaining tasks. Change into fresh mourning costume. Verify Catherine and your younger sisters are properly dressed. Receive Agnes for final protocol inspection before departure. The logistics continue even with the body removed, though the crisis management component has concluded. 44 hours since the scarlet fever notice posting. 28 hours remaining in Pemberton's standard inspection window. But the coffin is sealed and removed. Whatever evidence existed of protocol breaches and sanitary violations now contained in wood and iron, departing for St. Mary's Churchyard, where burial will render it permanently inaccessible to medical officer documentation. You sit for 10 minutes in the empty parlor, breathing air that no longer carries the weight of concealed decomposition, the camphor dissolving into July warmth. The ice mathematics proven sufficient. The visitor protocols maintained without the single breach that would have summoned Pemberton's authority before the sealing could be completed. The vigil is complete. The next performance begins at 1 o'clock. The hearse stands at your curb at 5 minutes before 1 o'clock. 8 ostrich plumes mounted at 17 shillings each, dyed black, and arranged in graduated heights, according to the specifications Agnes verified against mourning manuals. 4 mutes positioned at the hearse corners wearing professional grief expressions. 2 shillings per man for the service of standing motionless during procession. The coffin you purchased through Thomas Webb's itemized catalogue. Components selected individually. Prices negotiated per board foot of oak and yard of satin lining. You emerge from the house at precisely 1 o'clock with Catherine and Margaret, both dressed in mourning costume Agnes inspected this morning. The street has gathered its audience. Neighbors positioned at windows and doorsteps to observe procession quality and assess whether your husband's social standing has been properly represented in feathers and black fabric. Mrs. Blackwood visible 3 houses down, witnessing from her customary observation post. The mourning carriage waits behind the hearse. You enter first, maintaining widow composure for the watching street, then Catherine and Margaret. The driver starts the procession at walking pace, horses moving with the measured rhythm reserved for funeral transport. You track the route to St. Mary's, 8 streets, 2 turns, 14 minutes at regulation funeral speed. The procession passes through West Kensington's commercial district, where shop fronts pause their business to acknowledge death passing. Men remove hats. Women pause at thresholds. The performance of public mourning extends beyond your household, to include these street witnesses who recognize the symbols you have purchased, to demonstrate appropriate grief scale. Pemberton's office sits on the 3rd street of the route. You see the building as the procession passes. Municipal Health Department marked in gold letters on dark brick, the windows reflecting black plumes and horses. His inspection authority extends to funeral processions when sanitary violation is suspected. He does not emerge. The hearse continues its measured pace, carrying sealed evidence past the man whose documentation power you have spent 6 days evading through ICE deliveries and camphor applications. St. Mary's Churchyard receives the procession at 1:15. Reverend Hartwell waiting at the church entrance in full vestments, prayer book held at chest height. The service proceeds according to the schedule he negotiated with Agnes. Psalm readings, prayers for the deceased, hymns performed at regulation duration with regulation solemnity. You maintain the widow position in the front pew. Catherine on your left, Margaret on your right. Agnes seated behind in the maiden aunt position. 23 minutes for the service. You track the remaining timeline until this performance ends. Burial follows immediately, then the return journey to your house, where afternoon callers will arrive to express condolences and assess your grief management competence. The burial ground lies north of the church building. The grave has been prepared, clay soil removed and piled beside the opening. Thomas Webb supervises as the coffin is lowered on ropes, each corner descending in coordinated rhythm, until wood meets earth 6 feet below ground level. Reverend Hartwell reads the committal prayers. Earth to earth. Ashes to ashes. The words Agnes specified must be spoken to satisfy mourning protocol requirements. 17 minutes from coffin lowering to final prayers. You watch William's sealed casket settle into clay, with the knowledge that you have successfully navigated 6 days of crisis management disguised as mourning custom. The ICE calculations that prevented complete decomposition. The camphor applications that masked evidence of biological process. The visitor protocols that maintained proper display while concealing sanitary reality. The morning ICE delivery coordinates that kept preservation possible until the sealing could be completed, and Pemberton's documentation authority rendered irrelevant. The grave fills with earth, 6 cubic yards of clay covering oak and iron, and the evidence no inspection will ever document. Catherine and Margaret's marriage prospects preserved. The household reputation maintained. William's professional legacy represented in proper funeral scale rather than medical officer reports on sanitary violation and middle-class protocol failure. The mourners begin to depart. You remain at graveside for the prescribed interval, widow's final witness before the return to household management and afternoon calling hours. The sun stands at 2 o'clock angle. The earth settles over William's coffin. The performance moves to its next required scene. Agnes approaches you on the church steps after the burial, and pronounces the funeral properly conducted. The statement arrives without preamble, no softening phrase, no acknowledgement of your presumed grief, only the assessment delivered as established fact. You recognize this as the highest praise she offers, and accept it with the gratitude expected of a widow who has been guided through proper mourning protocol. She notes that your performance of grief was appropriate to your station. The word performance is not accidental. You demonstrated sorrow at the regulation intensity for the regulation duration in front of the regulation number of witnesses, and your social standing remains intact. The mathematics she does not state aloud. 17 morning callers documented in her ledger. 6 days of proper vigil display. 1 funeral conducted according to the standards Queen Victoria herself established after Albert's death in 1861. The outcome: your daughter's marriage prospects undamaged. The yardage was correct, Agnes says. The jewelry appropriate. The service duration met requirements. You incline your head. Your guidance was invaluable. This exchange, like everything else this week, is performance. The underlying calculation, neither of you names. You have successfully managed corpse logistics while performing bereavement, and no one observed the crisis underneath the custom. Not Pemberton, who conducted his street inspection and found nothing actionable at your address. Not Mrs. Blackwood, whose testimony to other households will now reinforce rather than damage your reputation. Not Catherine, who asked dangerous questions but received answers that preserved both truth and household standing. Agnes departs with the same measured pace she maintained throughout the week. You watch her black-clad figure retreat down the church path, and understand that Victorian widowhood is a test you pass by maintaining the correct facial expression while coordinating ice deliveries. You have achieved the only outcome that matters. Your husband is buried, and your daughter's prospects are secured. The afternoon sun filters through London haze. 6 days of managed crisis condense into this single moment of acknowledgement, and then disperse. You turn toward the waiting carriage. The household awaits your return, and with it, the resumption of routines that no longer require social performance or emergency logistics. You return to the townhouse at 6 o'clock, and the silence that greets you is different from the managed quiet of the vigil days. This is simply the absence of crisis. No ice deliveries to schedule, no mourners to receive, no medical officer to avoid. The entrance hall stands empty, gaslight already lit by the housemaid, and you observe the space without the constant calculation of what must be concealed or displayed. The parlor door stands open. You pause at the threshold without entering, seeing the empty room where the casket was positioned for 6 days. The floor still bears marks from the weight of the supports, 4 rectangular impressions in the carpet pile where wood pressed fabric against floorboards. The window drapes remain closed, black crepe filtering July evening light into grey. The flowers are gone, removed this morning before the funeral procession. What remains is simply a room, waiting to resume its ordinary function. Catherine and Margaret retreat upstairs to remove their mourning dress. You hear their footsteps on the carpeted stairs growing fainter, the household returning to unperformed rhythms. No visitors will arrive this evening. No protocols require your attention. The week's accumulated tension, the constant awareness of time passing, ice melting, conditions changing, releases without ceremony or acknowledgement. You stand in the entrance hall listening to the house settle into evening. Somewhere in the kitchen the cook prepares supper. The housemaid moves through upper rooms, her steps following patterns established over years, rather than the modified routes of Vigil Week. You realize you have forgotten what this silence sounds like, when it is not being maintained for social display, or concealing biological emergency. The shawl around your shoulders carries warmth from the carriage. You loosen it, feeling the weight of black fabric shift. 6 days of crisis management, disguised as mourning custom, are complete. What follows is simply time, passing without urgency or calculation, and a gradual return to rhythms that require neither performance nor concealment. Thomas Webb's final invoice arrives with the evening post, and you spread it across the morning room table to review the itemized accounting of your husband's burial. each component listed separately with its associated cost. The document transforms grief into commercial transaction with the precision web maintained throughout the week. Every service option and timeline management decision now rendered as line items in black ink. Coffin, £4 12 shillings. Lining, satin as Agnes required, £5 8. Handles, brass rather than iron, £1 7. Nameplate, engraved, 12 shillings. Hearse with 4 black horses, £3. Plumes for the horses, £1 4. Mutes to walk beside the hearse, 15 shillings. Crape for the window drapes, £2 6. Chapel fee, £1. And at the bottom of the second page, a line item you have been dreading and expecting in equal measure, nails, 8 at 3p each. The specific hardware that sealed William's casket permanently this morning. 2 shillings total for the objects that ended the vigil and secured the evidence of 6 days. Management before Pemberton's inspection could document anything actionable. You have purchased your husband's funeral one component at a time, like assembling furniture from a commercial catalogue. The total represents 4 months of your reduced household budget, translated into the social performance that protected your daughters' prospects. Every pound spent was a calculation, how much for proper display versus how much to conceal the crisis underneath. Webb's invoice makes no distinction between the two categories. To him, as to everyone except you and perhaps Agnes, there was only one funeral, properly conducted according to mourning custom. Your hand rests on the invoice paper, feeling the weight of the document that records grief as a series of commercial transactions. The candlelight flickers across the itemized list. Outside, July evening fades toward darkness. You will file this with the other mourning paperwork, the death certificate, the burial permit, Agnes's documentation of proper yardage and visitor count, in the bureau drawer where such documents are stored and never referenced again. The nails cost 3p each. You paid 2 shillings for permanent closure, and the price, like everything else this week, was precisely calculated, and exactly sufficient. You enter the parlour at 9 o'clock with no specific purpose. The chair by the window still holds the exact angle you positioned it 6 days ago, slightly turned toward the door, far enough from the casket to appear composed, close enough to appear attentive. The carpet shows depressions where the support structure stood, rectangles of compressed wool that will rise again over weeks of ordinary traffic, erasing the physical evidence that this room contained a body on display. The gaslight catches dust motes settling. They have been settling since morning, since the undertaker's cart departed, since the house stopped being a stage and became only a building again. You sit in the chair and realize you have forgotten what this room was used for before Monday, before the vigil, before the measurements and the ice calculations and the visitor schedule that dictated every hour. A room, 4 walls, a window. Furniture arranged according to function rather than mourning protocol. You try to remember where the settee stood before Thomas Webb moved it to accommodate the casket. The bookshelf. The small table that held calling cards, all of it rearranged, and now you cannot recall the original configuration. The quiet now is different from the quiet you maintained during the vigil. That silence was constructed. Agnes's rules about appropriate conversation, your own careful modulation of grief, the suppression of domestic noise that might suggest the household continued functioning while a body lay downstairs. This quiet is simply the absence of crisis. No mourners to receive. No ice delivery to monitor. No medical officer approaching with inspection authority. You rest your hands in your lap. The mourning dress still carries its weight. 43 yards of bombazine that Agnes measured by looking. But the performance is finished. The audience has departed. What remains is a widow, in an empty parlour, wearing regulation grief, with no one present to assess its adequacy. The window is open, has been open since noon, when you allowed the house to breathe without concealment. July air moves through the room, carrying away the last traces of camphor. The smell, that masked decomposition for 6 days, applied and reapplied according to a schedule you maintained with the precision of someone whose daughter's futures depended on concealing biological reality from social observers. You do not cry. Tears were not part of the performance Agnes prescribed, and they are not part of whatever this is, this unwitnessed moment. This return to a room that is only a room, freed from the function it served, waiting to be used again for ordinary purposes you can no longer name. The parlor still holds traces of lavender. Fainter now that the windows have been open for hours, but present. The night air moves through the space and carries the smell toward dissolution. Not erasure. The walls, the drapes, the carpet have absorbed 6 days of chemical preservation. But dilution. The gradual return to a house that smells like a house rather than a mortuary. You stand at the open window, your hands rest on the sill. The morning dress you will wear for the regulation year no longer requires performance. No visitors to note its proper construction. No Agnes to assess yardage. No Mrs. Blackwood cataloguing components for later circulation. The dress is correct because the regulations state it must be correct, and you have already proven your capacity for compliance. The street below shows no scarlet notices. No medical officer walks his inspection rounds. Dr. Marcus Pemberton's scheduled visit ended when you compressed the timeline and removed William's body before the 72 hours expired. The threat that dictated every calculation since Monday morning, ice deliveries, visitor duration, protocol breaches documented in Agnes's ledger, resolved itself through operational management rather than social catastrophe. You maintained function while a corpse dictated the household schedule. You calculated ice requirements against July temperature and delivery reliability. You positioned yourself to receive 63 mourners, and ensured each one observed the exact performance that protected your daughter's marriage prospects. You identified every protocol breach before Agnes could document it as permanent record. You survived Dr. Pemberton's jurisdiction by removing the evidence before his authority could exercise itself. The accomplishment carries no celebration. Only the flat recognition that crisis management succeeded. Your daughters will receive calling cards rather than social exile. The household reputation remains intact. William's professional legacy survives undamaged by his widow's failure to maintain mourning custom against sanitary law. The night settles around the townhouse. Gas lamps along the street cast their measured light. Somewhere in West Kensington, another household receives a scarlet notice, begins their own calculations of time against regulation, weighs mourning duration against inspection authority. You do not know them. You will never know whether they succeed or fail in the same mathematics you just completed. Your breath releases without restriction. The corset still shapes your posture, but the vigilance that kept you monitoring every household detail has finally exhausted itself. 6 days of crisis compressed into 72 hours of countdown, and you emerged with everything intact. Not triumph, survival. The window remains open. The air continues moving. The house settles into silence that requires no management, no performance, no calculation, against an approaching deadline. You stand in the parlor and feel the weight of the mourning dress you will wear for a year, knowing the hardest performance is finished, and what remains is only duration. You climb the stairs at midnight. Each step familiar in darkness. The banister smooth under your palm. Your bedroom door opens without sound. The mourning dress unlaces in stages. 43 yards of bombazine Agnes measured without speaking the number aloud. Your shoulders drop as the fabric releases. The position you have held since Monday morning. Spine straight, chin level, hands folded at waist, finally abandoned in private darkness. Your corset loosens. The laces pull through their eyelets. Your ribs expand with the first unrestricted breath you have taken since William stopped breathing. The intake fills your lungs completely. The exhale carries 6 days of maintained composure out into the bedroom stillness. The dress pulls on the floor. You step away from it. The floorboards cool beneath your feet. Your body settles into its own shape, no longer held by regulation fabric, no longer positioned for social observation. No visitors to receive, no ICE to monitor, no medical officer approaching with inspection forms, no Agnes documenting breaches, no Catherine asking questions that require careful deflection, just the simple fact of survival through crisis that no one else will document or acknowledge. The bed waits. You move toward it in darkness. Your hand finds the post, the coverlet smooth under your palm. You lower yourself onto the mattress and feel your weight accepted without resistance. The house is silent around you. The unmanaged quiet that requires neither performance nor maintenance. Just wood settling. Distant sounds of the street. The ordinary noises of a July night in Kensington, where widows sleep alone and morning arrives without crisis. Your jaw unclenches. The constant vigilance that kept you calculating ICE deliveries and visitor duration and Pemberton's approach releases into exhaustion. Your body recognizes the end of emergency. The permission to stop monitoring, the return to rest that serves no purpose beyond recovery. Sleep approaches like fog, gradual, inevitable. The last thought before darkness. You survived. You lie in complete darkness, the house silent, your breath deepening, no corset, no crisis, just the body's weight on the mattress. Your jaw releases. The tension you have carried for 6 days dissolves. Your shoulders sink into the pillow. The street sounds fade. The house settles. Your breath slows to the rhythm of someone who has stopped calculating and monitoring and performing. No one observes. No one assesses. The darkness holds you without judgment. Your body surrenders to exhaustion earned through 6 days of maintaining function, while death dictated every schedule. Sleep arrives as the only witness to your unperformed collapse into rest.